Hey creeps, it's Horror Free For All. I'd like to continue my passion project of discovering Anthology, a series where I look at my favorite subgenre of films, specifically in the horror archetype of the subgenre, and I look at films that I've never seen before, or maybe have seen in the past that I haven't seen in a long time, or some of my favorites, and I just talk about the films in particular, the segments, and in my opinion, their overall impact on me and possibly the anthology subgenre as a whole. This film came out in the year 2000 on the USA Network, a network that was very famous back in the day for producing original movies and having original content broadcasted on the network. The film in question is Tract. Now, Tract is a film that I heard about in rumblings on the internet and on various sites talking about underrated horror anthology movies. Now, I have to say this up front. USA Network is an underrated cable network for original horror programming, at least back in the day. There was countless movies that would air on this network and other networks like it, like TBS Superstation, in a time when horror movies were kind of on the downswing. We saw in the late 80s that horror movies weren't bringing in box office results as they did in the early to mid portion of that decade. So in the 90s, there was a huge push to straight to video and straight to TV film. Part of that had to deal with VHS becoming a hugely popular way to ingest media, and video rental stores essentially becoming the cornerstone of Americana. So I get the reason why USA wanted to throw their hat in the ring with films, either taking a gamble with their own finances and financially producing it themselves, or finding an already produced film and I guess acquiring the rights to air it and have a hat in the ring in distribution. The latter is the story, from what I gather, of Tract here. Now, I don't know any of the history behind the people who made it. I really don't know the directors, the writers. They seem to be intertwined here. This might have been a passion project for them. But I have to say, this did not disappoint. And I think the reason why some of these, early 2000s, maybe late 90s anthology films are a bit better, at least in terms of registry for me, is because it was right after the apex of a popular HBO anthology television show known as Tales from the Crypt. And this movie has a lot of Tales from the Crypt in its veins. And on top of that, it has the traditional anthology formula of having a beginning story that wraps around each segment and you get payoff in the end, thus making this more appealing to your average anthology movie connoisseur. With that out the way, what are my thoughts on the segments in the movie themselves? Well, the first segment we technically get in the film is called Make Me an Offer. It stars John Ritter, who is a real estate agent, taking a couple out with him in his car as they tour around a few different home listings to tour the homes and see if it's a right fit for the couple. Unfortunately for John Ritter, beginning with the first house that he shows this couple, he's obligated to have to tell them the backstory of each home, and each home throughout the rest of the film that he has to share has a horror story associated with it. Now, once the couple and John Ritter get into the first house, the first real segment kicks on, and this one is called Nightmare. Nightmare is about a couple who lives in the first home that John Ritter and the current couple are actually touring. And one night, the husband leaves to go out for a business retreat, or I guess maybe like a business dinner with his colleagues. And the wife is at home alone, and there's some risque shots of her semi-bare-breasted, kind of off-screen, kind of not, but not full frontal or anything. And when she puts on her nightgown, an intruder has made his way inside of the home, and it's revealed that he's not necessarily an intruder, but a secret lover. Now, as these two start to get it on and get hot and frisky, the husband comes back with a double-barrel shotgun, and he has caught them in the act and has a sinister plan with them, let's just say. He orders the wife to essentially hang herself in a makeshift noose and holds her lover at gunpoint and wants to fuck with him a little bit and watch him squirm as he is going to kill his wife by making her hang herself and frame him for the murder so he can get away scot-free. Unfortunately for the husband, things don't go as planned, and his wife and her lover may get one over on him to the point where he possibly loses his life. Now, his wife's lover, in the moment, decides to take the husband's body out in his own car and drive off to a secluded area and ties the husband's dead corpse to some cinder blocks and some chains and throws them into the middle of a body of water. Once this event happens, they leave the husband's car behind and they try to play off their alibi story and how they're going to gather themselves when people start coming looking for the woman's husband. Now, from this point of the story, things start to take a turn for the wife. She starts to have recurring nightmares to the point where she can't tell what's discernibly real or unreal in these hallucinations, let's just say. She may or may not be seeing a zombified version of her husband who is waterlogged from being thrown into his watery grave. And this starts to impede on her relationship with her lover. Now, this comes to a point where they have to start to cover their tracks a little bit with with the husband's best friend, who happens to be a neighbor who might be suspicious of them. And the anxiety is only made worse when the woman seems to think that her husband's dead animated corpse is coming after her and stalking her and her lover when they're staying inside of the home where her and her husband used to co-inhabit. Now, it comes to a point in the story where the lover realizes that he left behind the husband's car, and since the husband's friend is suspicious of them, he needs to find the keys. He can't seem to find the keys and has to go underwater to the husband's corpse to see if they're on his person. And this may or may not come to backfire on him, let's just say, because when we get to the climax of the story, all those nightmares and the paranoia and these weird premonition-like dreams that the woman has been having may affect her lover and what's going to happen to her. Once this story is over, the couple that John Ritter's character has been entertaining in this first home don't like the idea of staying in the home after hearing that story, so they want to go see a different home. So they hop in the car after John Ritter looks really disgruntled that they didn't like the house after hearing the story, and they make it to house number 2. And when they get to house number 2, he has another unfortunate story to share with the couple because this house has a history of its own. And this kicks off the second main story, and it's called Bobo. Now, Bobo is about a family led by the patriarch, Bryan Cranston. Bryan Cranston is a father of a little girl and has a lovable wife, and he lives a normal, mundane life in suburbia. Unfortunately for him, his precarious daughter is out venturing in the backyard one day and claims that she has found a monkey. Now, the monkey seems to be befriending her, and she really wants to look after it and keep it as a pet. Her father has no interest of having a monkey as a pet since they already have a family dog, and thinks that having a monkey in the house could be dangerous given that the dog is much bigger than the monkey, and they have no idea where the monkey comes from, who he belonged to, and really how it behaves. To make matters worse, when he finally sees that the monkey is real, he makes a half-handed promise to his daughter, saying that they can keep the monkey until they find its owner. Unfortunately for him, he didn't take into account that all the daughter heard from that statement was, "We can keep him." So she takes it upon herself to bring him inside of the house. And almost immediately, Bryan Cranston's character starts to lose his shit. He goes off on his daughter and says you shouldn't have brought the monkey in the house after I told you not to, and raises a big fit against her. And it's only made worse when the monkey catches the attention of the family dog and starts to make a mess in the living room. And it seems like the monkey is throwing things at the dog to harm him. Now, as the story progresses, Bryan Cranston starts to notice that the monkey comes and goes out of the house, and he really wants it out and has to be the bad guy against his daughter. And he starts to chase the monkey around. The monkey doesn't like the fact that the dad is chasing him around all the time, so it starts to act out a little more. This builds up to a point in the story where the dad ambushes the monkey inside of his daughter's room and cages him up, which of course upsets the daughter, raises a commotion, and drives a wedge even further between him and his daughter's relationship and even his wife's relationship. Now, to make matters worse, soon after he puts away the monkey, he realizes that it has escaped and has done something horrible to the family dog. And once Bryan Cranston's character sees what happens to the family dog, he tries to hide the evidence so he doesn't scare his daughter and his wife. And realizing the gravity of the situation, knows that it has to be the monkey, and he has to do something about it without being the bad guy anymore, because he's already dug himself a deeper hole. So he decides to go to a local pound where there's an animal handler on duty. And the animal handler is actually played by professional wrestler, or at least former professional wrestler, Buff Bagwell. You may remember from World Championship Wrestling on Monday Night Nitro. Buff Bagwell's character is more than enthused to help catching an exotic monkey. He seems to be wearily on board with it and follows Bryan Cranston to his home and sets up shop there and says, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." Now, Bryan Cranston, feeling a little bit at ease, he tries to come up with ways to cope after he's had to, be the bad guy and tell his daughter and his wife possibly what happened to the family dog, or not necessarily telling them what happened to the dog, but, holding back tears and wanting to tell the truth, but can't because he knows that nobody's going to believe him because he's already come off as much of a lunatic as he has at this point of the story. Well, to make matters worse, when he goes back to check up on the animal handler, he has been brutally murdered by said monkey. Now, he has to, of course, hide the exterminator's body and figure out what to do from there. And at this point, he's driven on to full lunacy, and he realizes that he has to get his family out of the house because this monkey is a bona fide killer. After making a huge spectacle to his wife and his daughter to get out of the house so he can handle the monkey, things don't seem to go his way as the monkey escapes yet again. And the wife and the daughter get tired of waiting, so they decide to come back home anyway. Unfortunately for him, he has to realize that the monkey's in the house with his wife and his daughter, and he may claim one last victim, and that victim might be one too many. And this builds up to the finale of the story, where we see the father going complete batshit over the monkey in a particular room, and a certain character has to make a choice of whether to side with the father, the husband, or side with the sweet old innocent monkey. Now, once this story is over, yet again, the couple that's with John Ritter's character have no interest in staying in the home, again, because it's tied to something horrible that happened. So John Ritter's character reluctantly takes him to the final house, and he's starting to look a little more panicked. And we don't know why, but we get that in the very end of the movie once the wraparound comes to a close. And they end up going to a bit farther away down the road in the neighborhood to a third and final house. This kicks off the third story, called Come to Granny. Now, Come to Granny, if I haven't said this before about the other two segments prior, Nightmare and Bobo were around 30 minutes apiece. This segment is less than 20 minutes. The story of Come to Granny is revolved around a psychiatrist who is a lonely woman and it's getting dark out one night. She is greeted by a young teen, or maybe young adult, that needs her help and needs to come clean about some things that he has been going through that nobody seems to believe him on. So she, takes in the client and starts to listen to what he has to say. And the client is very upfront about what's been going on, and he essentially tells her that he is a psychic, and for the past few days, he's been haunted by these premonition visions of this killer dressed in a granny mask, going around killing people in brutal ways, in alleyways, in homes, and what have you. And he is haunted by these visions and he doesn't know why he's being chosen to see these things, but he feels like he needs to tell somebody who might believe him or understand where he's coming from, in a way that maybe through that they can stop this killer and put an end to everything. Well, as he's telling some of these various kills that he witnessed and some people that he knew being affected by this granny-faced killer, let's just say, the psychiatrist grows increasingly alarmed, to the point where she is holding makeshift weapons behind her back in case this guy tries anything on her, because she seems to think that he is this actual killer, and he's confessing to her his crimes without technically confessing them. And perhaps this may be associated with a certain disorder such as DID. Well, because this is a horror anthology story, there's a plot twist involving the young adult male character. But unfortunately for the psychiatrist, there's a reveal that comes very late in the story that could possibly help her with what she's going to have to deal with. But she chooses to ignore it because she's so hell-bent on things that she's already perceived to be the case. This may or may not backfire for her, as you'll see near the end of the story. Now, once this final segment here wraps up, we get thrown back into the situation with John Ritter and the couple that we've been seeing throughout the movie. The couple is mortified again by this third and final story and realizes that they've had enough with this real estate agent guy, because despite their repeated requests, they just want a normal home, but he keeps giving them homes to tour that have terrible backstories. So John Ritter, we have seen him growing increasingly agitated throughout the film in the wraparound segments we have already seen. We don't know necessarily why, but he gets a phone call on his cell phone of a deep-pitched male voice on the other end telling him that he needs to sell a house, and his wife and his son are there listening. If he doesn't sell the house by 5 o'clock, there's something implied that's going to happen to his family. And we see something gloriously violent happen to a particular character. Once this event happens, the other member of the couple tries to escape the house and notices the horrors lurking around the entire neighborhood in suburbia where they're touring to buy a home. So that, in a nutshell, is Terror Tract. Now, I'm going to say this up front about this anthology film. I thought that this was a unique idea to use suburbia as a framing device for a horror anthology movie. Some of these stories actually bring to light possible events that could happen in suburbia, even though that all three of the stories are definitely played up to the ultimate extreme, because I guess the creators of this movie had a schlocky heart. And for me, that won me over with this film tremendously. This film is honestly a bastard child of what you expect in Creepshow, EC Comics, Tales from the Crypt anthology show, and if you put a dash, just a little bit, of Tales from the Dark Side in the mix, that's what Terror Tract is here. All of the acting performances in this film were incredible. Seeing John Ritter and Bryan Cranston in a movie together was insane to me. and I still love this movie for having that. In each one of the houses that these stories went into, all had their own history and their own type of horror story going for them. And they all had something, I guess, to say about suburban life. The first story, Nightmare, is about adultery, and it's about sleeping around and hiding away your secrets from your neighbors and trying to mask a cloak of what you want your community to perceive you as. The second segment, Bobo, is about, kids finding things like animals or whatever the case may be that comes into the home, and the parents have to be stern and try to protect their kids at all costs. Now, here's the thing about Bobo specifically. You fall down into the commentary about the father who is trying to do best for the kid, but the wife seems to think that he's being too overbearing or being too manly and too rough. And this perhaps backfires on them because they don't really value his fatherly role the way that they should and don't listen to him. And it's a fun inflection on the father becoming like the kid that you normally see in kids' horror, having to prove themselves to their family time and time again that what they're saying is the truth. And the last story, Come to Granny, is perhaps an inflection on violence that happens in suburbia, like serial killers and the violent nature of being in close quarters and having, psychotic men around attractive women, and how that breeds mass violence when it shouldn't. Honestly, this film had a strong writing presence behind each of these segments, and with a decent budget, it actually helped some of these stories pop. Unfortunately, looking at each segment individually, you start to see some problems inherent in each of them. And I think a lot of the problems in this film stem down to two things. Inadequate runtime in terms of what other segments were given compared to what a certain segment was given, let's just say. And the second major issue is trying really hard to fill out a runtime for a cable network looking for around an hour and a half of programming just so they can fit a perfect 2-hour time slot to the film and have plenty of room for ads and ad revenue. The first main segment, Nightmare, I'd probably give this one a 2.75 out of 5 stars. I thought this segment was okay by the end of it. My biggest problem with this segment is that it's way too fucking long. There's so many draggy points to this story, and it almost feels like there's 3 identical dream sequence fake outs in a row that take up about 10 to 12 minutes in that mid to back portion of the segment, to the point where I'm just asking myself, why does this segment need to be as long as it is? They really could have shaved off 2 of those dream fake out sequences, kept the scariest one, and just trimmed the fat and made this a clean 20 to 21 minutes, and they would have been just fine. And if I haven't said this about this segment yet, I guess I'll say it here. This feels the most in tune with EC Comics and Tales from the Crypt. This could have been a Tales from the Crypt segment on the HBO show. It had some boobies, it had some sex, it had some asshole comeuppance, adulterous wives, schlocky zombies in the water, coming out of the water type of stuff. This would have been a shoo-in for that show, and it almost feels like a lost episode, pretty much made in full. The second segment, Bobo, I thought this was my personal favorite of the movie here. I'd probably give this one a 4.25 out of 5 stars. This one was just batshit insane. Also, it would have fit perfectly in with Tales from the Crypt as well, I feel. My only negative with this story really is that it also feels a bit too long. And honestly, there are some things about the monkey and how it comes into the story that is never goddamn explained. But other than that, Really, really fun segment. Now, the last main segment, Come to Granny, this was the shortest one, clocking in at under 20 minutes. I gave this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Now, what I think would have benefited this segment is perhaps an extra 10 minutes. Like I said, if you would have cut off 10 minutes from Nightmare, you could have added some minutes onto this one to at least make it around 28 minutes. Or maybe if you don't want to go that long, maybe a clean 25. I think that there's some fun visuals in this with the killer dressed in the granny mask. I thought that shit was hilarious to me. And some of the kills, while they were mostly off screen, and I should say that for pretty much all the violence in the movie, perhaps minus 1 or 2 scenes that actually show some pretty decent blood effects. This one was kind of a fun inversion on Dressed to Kill a little bit, with a mix of Final Destination in its veins. Now, the only thing I think holding this back further than just the runtime of it as well is perhaps the obvious misdirect that was going to happen by the end. The story was so obviously setting up one angle with a certain character that you know that it's not going to be that, so you know what's going to happen. And if you're programmed, and if you've seen plenty of Tales from the Crypt, which this also feels very at home with, you could see this twist coming from a mile away. Now, the wraparound segment, also known as Make Me an Offer, about a 3.25 out of 5 stars. I think that what holds this segment back was the fact that we got introduced to these characters way early on in the story. And as the story progresses, it just jumps from house to house, I guess, to keep the pace going, trying to keep that traditional anthology spirit alive in the film, which I can appreciate. But this segment, it wraps up very quickly after the final segment, and I'm talking less than 5 minutes, the wraparound segment's over, which some people could be into, but I think that this one would have been way more fun to explore what's going on with John Ritter's family, and they could have easily expanded that on for an additional 20 or so minutes and try to push that 2-hour mark with the film. And I really don't get why they try to make this movie a lean, less than 100 minutes and include 4 stories technically, but give 2 of the stories around an hour combined, and then the wraparound and the final true segment collectively only make up less than 40 minutes. I couldn't tell you, but it was really fun, especially in that last few minutes of the movie, seeing just how fucked up this neighborhood is and how deranged John Ritter is. That was super fun, so it did make up for its shortcomings. So this brings me to my final thoughts on Terror Tract. Is this a anthology classic? In my opinion, I think it is. I think there's a segment in here for everyone. If you're traditional EC Comics in that regard, you're probably going to love Nightmare or respect Nightmare in a lot of ways. If you like dumb B-movie slasher stuff with crazy gimmicks, or maybe homages to fun classic movies like Dressed to Kill, Come to Granny is that segment for you. Or if you're a massive Bryan Cranston fan and like grown men picking fights with animals, Bobo is going to be for you. With that out of the way, I'd probably give Terror Tract, maybe like if I'm being generous, a 3.75 out of 5 stars. At the end of the day, a 3.75 for me is inoffensive. I do think that this is a movie that I would go out of my way to buy for my collection and recommend to you all. And if you haven't seen this movie, after everything I've said, you should go find it for free on YouTube, where you can do that as we speak, and check this movie out and see if you like it before you buy it. Or until next time, this has been fun, and I'll see you soon.